Debate. The Honourable Member for Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will be sharing my time. Now, the Democrats want to make sure that we get this park right. That means ensuring the ecological integrity and conservation are top priorities for the Rouge Urban Park. However, this does not mean that we want to kick out farmers. It does not mean that we don't want to ensure that we are producing as much food locally for the Greater Toronto Area as possible, Mr. Speaker, because that makes both common sense and it's good for the environment. And of course, we just heard the Parliamentary Secretary talking about how farmers have not been able to make investments over time to ensure that they're following best practices for their own ecological integrity. And of course, we would support measures that would help farmers to make those investments and give them the opportunity to improve their land, Mr. Speaker, because it is the park and the entire region that we want to see protection expanded and protections improved to make sure that the Rouge Park and the farmers are there for many generations to come, both for the City of Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area, and of course for everyone that will eventually go enjoy the park. Now, we recognize the decades of hard work and dedication of all community members who have worked tirelessly to protect the existing parklands and conceptualize the national park. Now, the NDP supports the creation of a Rouge National Urban Park, but not if it means compromising the protection of our environment, Mr. Speaker. It is too risky a precedent to set for any potential future national urban parks that might be created, because this is going to be the template from which any future potential parks are going to be based on. Mr. Speaker. And that's why we're opposing at third reading Bill C-40. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we will be proposing a new bill that would fix the rollbacks of parks protection and that the Conservatives have brought forward, and it builds on the positive direction in which Bill C-40 started and strengthens it based on the feedback and the testimony that we heard from all the witnesses during the committee stage, so that we can actually, in fact, seek a consensus on the creation of this national urban park. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, that such an approach would help break the logjam with the province and with the local stakeholders in this process and ensure that the park is created in the best possible way. Now, the local community has said that we need better legislation to ensure that the Rouge is maintained for future generations. The creation of Canada's first urban national park will set the precedent how we protect ecologically sensitive land in urban settings in the future. It is imperative that we get this concept right. The government can create all the parks it wants, but without funding and careful protection of the ecological integrity of these and all national parks, the designation is relatively meaningless in terms of conservation. Now, we listened to expert testimony and proposed 18 different amendments to create a more robust legislative framework for Bill C-40, and we are extremely disappointed, sadly not surprised, that the Conservatives have once again shown their unwillingness to listen to stakeholders and work with the other parties to create legislation that represents all of the interests of those involved. And that's why we're creating a new bill. The new bill will be in the name of our MP for Scarborough Rouge River, and we want to see the creation of a park. However, we aren't going to settle for substandard environmental protections. We will continue to work hard to see the creation of the Rouge National Urban Park. We'll work towards good, strong environmental policies that prioritize ecological integrity and the maintenance of farmland, and to ensure that the best possible protection of our precious Carolinian forests and watersheds, while working with the agricultural community to ensure the continuation of sustainable farming and local food production in the park, Mr. Speaker. So to summarize, really, we've been through a process in debating this bill, first at second reading with the presenting of multiple petitions calling on the government to act in a certain way. And of course, as this process has gone on, where we actually had more consensus at the beginning of the process, because of an unwillingness of the government to work with the other stakeholders, slowly but surely, institutional and government support has fallen away from this bill because it fails to meet the standards that we all believe should be there to ensure ecological integrity, to ensure sustainable farming, to ensure that our watersheds are protected. And of course, Mr. Speaker, with a pipeline that goes across there, multiple highways and roads and infrastructure, of course, this adds additional challenges and things that have to be taken into consideration. But what we also have here, Mr. Speaker, is really a golden opportunity in the creation of this park to establish worldwide international best standards with respect to the interaction of the environment and infrastructure, with respect to the environment and farming, with respect to the interaction of people and human beings into sensitive ecological areas. We can actually look to making best practices there and taking what's already exists around the world in order to make the best park with the best protections, the kind of template that we would be proud to pass along to other parks and other urban areas in the future, Mr. Speaker, because of course 80% of Canada's population lives in urban centres already, and the importance of having ecological lands and having forests and watersheds and other aspects of nature in and around these urban centres is going to continue to gain importance, Mr. Speaker. And of course, with a growing population, we also need to make sure that we are producing more food locally, Mr. Speaker. So this is why we're also upset that this government has continued down the path of past Conservative and Liberal governments in failing to actually correct the mistake that was the eviction of many farmers and the expropriation of land for a Pickering Airport, Mr. Speaker, because there we have tens of thousands of acres of prime agricultural land that should be farmed locally, that should be producing food for the Greater Toronto Area, that should be protected for generations to come, and that should allow the farmers on there to ensure that sustainable best practices are in place to make sure that they're not causing any problems for the surrounding environment, to make sure that they are the most productive that they can be, so that they can pass those farms along to future generations, and so that we can continue to feed the growing population in the Greater Toronto Area, which is already well over 5 million people, Mr. Speaker. And then when you factor in areas further than that, you're looking at, within the Hamilton area, many more people, and in southwestern Ontario and southern Ontario, where of course we have a large chunk of Canada's population. And the more food that we're able to grow locally, the less environmental impact that our food supplies will create, because of course when you're making food in far distant places and then shipping them across a continent, across an ocean, there's of course an enormous amount of resources that have to be used to get that product to market. Of course, whether our resources are appropriately priced is an entire discussion altogether, but we can all agree that locally produced food makes good sense for the economy, good sense for families, and certainly makes good sense for the environment. So the government's also missing an opportunity to protect tens of thousands of land that was expropriated for the creation of a Pickering Airport, Mr. Speaker. We have other areas where we can expand airport capacity so that we don't have to lose that prime agricultural land. And of course, you see the parliamentary secretary kept going on and on and on and on and on and on and on about the importance of making sure that farming is still happening in that area. But where is that member when it comes time to have the discussion about actually reversing that terrible decision that existed 40 years ago, where the expropriation of the land happened, and then farmers who have been there ever since have been on one-year leases. And of course, myself and several colleagues went to actually go visit many of those farms, and we participated in day-long events where we actually got to understand and see what that area brings to the province of Ontario and to our local economy. And of course, it could only get better than that if those lands were protected. But that parliamentary secretary in that debate is nowhere to be found, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, he cares about a few farmers, but he doesn't really seem to care about the rest. And it's our total food supply which has to be protected, Mr. Speaker. And this bill falls far short of what we should be expecting and the kind of standards that we should be exacting to make sure that we have a Rouge National Urban Park that respects all the stakeholders, farmers, environmentalists, the local community, local governments, and everybody involved in that park. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have time for one question, question et commentaire. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the comments that have been made by the member. And I just want to pick up on the importance, what we're talking about in regards to a park, that there is an obligation on the government to work with the different stakeholders. And what's very clear here, Mr. Speaker, is not only did the government not listen to the stakeholders, when it came to have an opportunity at the committee stage to try to improve upon the bill, the government once again refused to do that. And it's unfortunate, given the importance that Canadians have as a whole in our national parks, that the government has actually lost the opportunity to be able to provide something through government action in which Canadians as a whole would be supportive. And the reason why we believe that they have failed is because they have not worked with the people that are important to work with, whether it's the grassroots organizers of the park, volunteers, or different levels of government. If the member might want to provide comment on that.
The Honourable Member Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Of course, one of the primary problems that we see with this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that in the bill it says that the minister may create an advisory committee, whereas we and many witnesses came before the committee to say that should be changed to the minister shall create an advisory committee to make sure that the local stakeholders are involved in future decisions, that they have an avenue to contact the minister that's going to be making the final decisions, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, especially in the climate of this Parliament, the opposition has very little trust in the current minister that's responsible for this in actually making the proper decisions to make sure that the parkland is protected.
The Honourable